"Hide that child," said the mysterious Hell's Angels member as he handed the baby to the waitress. "Hide that child," said the mysterious Hell's Angels member as he handed the baby to the waitress. The words, uttered with a chilling urgency, cut through the low hum of the fluorescent lights and the clatter of ceramic mugs in the all-night diner. It was a Tuesday evening, or perhaps more accurately, the early hours of Wednesday morning, a time when the world outside the greasy windows of the Midnight Grill felt distant and blurred, wrapped in the cold, damp embrace of late autumn. Sarah, whose name was stitched in faded blue thread above the pocket of her pale, slightly stained apron, felt the unexpected weight of the infant in her arms. The sudden warmth of the small body, the soft, downy hair brushing against her hand, was an alien sensation, a stark contrast to the familiar chill of the metal tray she usually carried. Her mind, accustomed to the predictable rhythm of orders for lukewarm coffee and burnt toast, struggled to grasp the reality of the scene unfolding before her. The man, a hulking figure whose presence seemed to consume the cramped space of the booth, did not wait for a response. His face, partially obscured by a dark beard and the shadow of his leather vest, bore an expression of grim determination mixed with something akin to desperation. The Hell's Angels patch on his back, a fearsome winged skull, seemed to pulse with an unspoken threat, a silent testament to the dangerous world he inhabited. He wore a heavy leather jacket, its surface scarred with countless journeys and encounters, and his gloved hands, surprisingly gentle for a man of his imposing stature, carefully placed the swaddled bundle into Sarah's outstretched arms. The baby, no more than a few months old, stirred slightly, a tiny whimper escaping its lips, but its eyes remained closed, lost in the innocent oblivion of sleep. Sarah's gaze flickered from the baby's serene face to the man's intense eyes, which held hers captive for a fleeting moment. There was a story in those eyes, a narrative of fear, urgency, and an impossible choice. Before she could articulate a single question, before the shock could fully crystallize into coherent thought, the man was already moving. He slid out of the booth with an astonishing swiftness for his size, his heavy boots making barely a sound on the checkered linoleum floor. Without another word, without a backward glance, he was gone, a phantom disappearing into the pre-dawn gloom, leaving behind only the lingering scent of stale tobacco and the profound, bewildering silence. The diner, which had moments before seemed a haven of mundane predictability, now felt charged with an electric, almost dangerous energy. Sarah stood frozen, the tiny bundle a living, breathing enigma in her arms. The baby's warmth spread through her, a stark counterpoint to the growing chill of dread that snaked its way up her spine. Her colleague, Martha, a woman whose perpetually tired eyes had seen almost everything the late-night shift could throw at her, emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a grease-stained towel. Martha stopped dead in her tracks, her mouth falling open slightly as she registered the sight of Sarah holding an infant. "Sarah? What in God's name?" Martha's voice was a hushed whisper, laced with a mixture of confusion and burgeoning alarm. Sarah could only shake her head, her voice caught somewhere deep in her throat. Her gaze remained fixed on the baby, its delicate features a stark contrast to the rough, dangerous world from which it had clearly just emerged. The baby was wrapped in a simple, worn blanket, an unusual choice for what appeared to be such a vulnerable, precious life. There were no baby bags, no car seat, no obvious signs of preparation, only the swift, desperate act of a man passing off a child. The weight of the baby in her arms was not just physical, it was a sudden, crushing responsibility. Sarah, at 26, had never held a baby before, not properly. Her life had been a series of shifts at the diner, an endless cycle of serving strangers, scraping by, and dreaming of a future that felt perpetually out of reach. Motherhood was a distant, abstract concept, a chapter in someone else's story, certainly not hers. Yet, here she was, holding a tiny human being, entrusted with its very existence by a man who was now just a memory, a chilling echo in the deserted street outside. A wave of nausea washed over her. "Hide that child." The words replayed in her mind, each syllable a hammer blow of urgency and veiled threat. Hide it from whom? From what? The implication was clear, the baby was in danger, and by extension, so was anyone associated with it. She felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. Her hands, usually steady as she balanced multiple plates, trembled almost imperceptibly. Martha, overcoming her initial shock, slowly approached, her eyes wide with concern. "Who was that, Sarah?" "What happened?" she asked, her voice softer now, sensing the gravity of the situation. Sarah finally found her voice, though it was a mere whisper. He just handed her to me. Said, "Hide that child." Then he left. She looked up at Martha, her eyes pleading for an explanation, for a way out of this impossible scenario. Martha took a step closer, peering at the baby's face. "A girl," she murmured, a strange tenderness entering her voice despite the underlying tension. "She's so small." Then her expression hardened. "He was one of them, wasn't he? A Hell's Angel. I saw his bike outside earlier, a big Harley, black as night." Martha had a knack for noticing details, a survival skill honed over years of working the graveyard shift. The confirmation of the man's affiliation sent another jolt of fear through Sarah. The Hells Angels were not just a motorcycle club, they were a notorious organization, their names synonymous with crime, violence, and an unyielding code of silence. To be entangled in their world, even peripherally, was to step into a vortex of danger from which escape was rarely easy. "What do I do, Martha?" Sarah asked, her voice bordering on a plea. The baby stirred again, a soft gurgle escaping its lips, a fragile sound that amplified the weight of the impossible decision now resting on Sarah's shoulders. Martha, pragmatic and street-smart, glanced around the mostly empty diner. A lone truck driver snored softly in a booth by the window, oblivious to the unfolding drama. "First, let's get her somewhere safe. The back office. It's warm there." She gestured towards the small, cluttered room behind the counter, a space usually reserved for inventory and employee breaks. "And then, we have to call someone, don't we? The police?" Her voice held a note of uncertainty, betraying her own apprehension. Calling the authorities meant opening a door to an unknown, potentially dangerous world. It meant questions, investigations, and exposing themselves to whatever dark forces had prompted the Hell's Angel to abandon the child. Sarah nodded numbly, her legs feeling like lead as she moved towards the back office. Every step felt momentous, a crossing of a threshold from her ordinary, predictable life into something far more perilous. The baby, nestled securely in her arms, seemed to pulse with an innocent vulnerability that made her heart ache. She carefully pushed open the door to the office, the familiar scent of old coffee and dusty paperwork doing little to ground her in reality. She gently placed the baby on a worn armchair, its faded floral pattern a stark contrast to the stark reality of the situation. The baby's small hands, no bigger than walnuts, were balled into tiny fists, a testament to its fragile strength. As she looked down at the sleeping infant, a sudden, horrifying thought struck her. What if the man hadn't just abandoned the child? What if he was being pursued? What if the people he was hiding the baby from were still out there, searching? The diner, once a sanctuary, now felt exposed, its glass windows offering little protection from the unseen threats that might be lurking in the shadows. The words, "Hide that child," echoed again, not as a command, but as a dire warning. The weight of the world, it seemed, had just been placed squarely in her hands, a tiny, innocent life now dependent on her choices, her courage, and her ability to navigate a world she barely understood. The quiet hum of the refrigerator in the office seemed to mock the frantic beating of her heart. She was a waitress, not a protector, not a hero. Yet, in this moment, she was all that this child had. The chilling realization settled deep in her bones, a cold, hard truth that would forever alter the course of her life. The mystery of the baby's origins, the identity of its parents, and the reasons behind its desperate abandonment, all remained shrouded in a terrifying darkness. Sarah knew, with a certainty that resonated through her entire being, that her life, and the life of this innocent child, had just changed irrevocably. The night was far from over. The small back office, a sanctuary of mundane clutter, now felt like a precarious fortress. Sarah stood over the sleeping infant, the rhythmic hum of the old refrigerator a stark counterpoint to the frantic beating of her heart. Martha, ever the pragmatist, had already begun to inspect the worn blanket wrapped around the baby. Her fingers, usually adept at counting change or wiping down counters, moved with an uncharacteristic gentleness, searching for any tag, any clue, any scrap of information that might explain the terrifying tableau. "Nothing," Martha murmured, her voice tight with frustration. "Just a plain, old blanket. No name, no markings. Nothing. She straightened up, her gaze sweeping over the cramped space, as if expecting answers to materialize from the dusty shelves crammed with cleaning supplies and forgotten invoices. We can't just leave her here, Sarah. It's not safe. And what about the owner, Mr. Henderson? He'll be in by 6. He'd have a fit. Sarah barely registered Martha's words. Her mind was a whirlwind of the Hell's Angels' desperate eyes, the baby's innocent face, and the chilling command, "Hide that child." The weight of those words pressed down on her, heavier than any tray of dirty dishes. She looked at the baby, so vulnerable, so utterly dependent. A wave of fierce, unexpected protectiveness surged through her, momentarily eclipsing the fear. She was a waitress, yes, but in this moment, she felt like a sentinel, a guardian appointed by a desperate man. "We can't call the police, Martha," Sarah said, the words surprising even herself with their conviction. He said, "Hide her. Not turn her over. If he was running from something, and he trusted me, if we call the police, we might be putting her in more danger, not less." Her voice was still a whisper, but it carried an unshakable resolve. Martha stared at her, her brows furrowed. "Sarah, this isn't a TV show. This is real. A Hell's Angel. They don't just drop off babies and disappear for no reason. This is serious. And hiding a child, that's a crime, Sarah. A serious one." The reality of Martha's words hit Sarah with a cold splash. A crime. She, Sarah Miller, who had never so much as jaywalked, was now contemplating harboring a child abandoned by a notorious biker. Her life, already on the fringes of stability, was about to be irrevocably shattered. Yet, the image of the man's desperate eyes, the silent plea in his gaze, held her captive. What if he comes back? Sarah countered, her voice trembling slightly. What if he was trying to protect her from something even worse than the police? What if the people he was running from are still out there, looking for her? If the police get involved, it becomes public. It becomes a target. Martha chewed on her lip, her eyes darting from Sarah to the baby. She knew the underbelly of the city better than Sarah did, the unspoken rules, the dangerous currents that flowed beneath the surface of everyday life. The Hell's Angels operated in a world where law enforcement was often seen as just another obstacle, and where their own brand of justice, or retribution, was swift and brutal. Okay, Martha conceded, exhaling slowly. For now. Just for now. But we need a plan, Sarah. She's going to wake up. She'll be hungry. She'll need changing. We can't keep her here indefinitely. As if on cue, a tiny whimper escaped the baby's lips. Her small hands uncurled, her eyelids fluttered, and then, a pair of wide, innocent blue eyes opened, staring up at the fluorescent lights of the back office. A silent gasp escaped Sarah's lips. The baby was even more beautiful awake, her features delicate, her gaze curious. The fear that had been gnawing at Sarah's insides momentarily receded, replaced by a profound tenderness. She's hungry, Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She reached out a tentative finger, stroking the baby's soft cheek. The baby responded by turning her head towards the touch, a tiny mouth opening and closing in a reflex. We don't have formula, bottles, diapers, anything, Martha listed, practical concerns overriding the fear for a moment. The truck driver's still out there, snoring. What if another customer comes in? We can't just pretend everything's normal. The diner's front door chimed, a harsh, unexpected sound that made both women jump. They exchanged a panicked glance. Sarah instinctively scooped the baby into her arms, holding her close, as if to shield her from the sudden intrusion. Martha peered cautiously through the small window in the office door. It's just old Mr. Jenkins, Martha whispered, relief washing over her face. He comes in every Wednesday for his early bird special. He's half blind anyway. We'll be fine for a bit. But the incident highlighted their precarious position. The world outside, with its mundane routines and unsuspecting customers, was a constant threat to their secret. They needed to move, to act, to transform the abstract concept of hiding the child into a tangible, achievable reality. My car, Sarah said, her voice barely audible. It's parked behind the diner. We can put her in there. It's dark, and she'll be out of sight for a while. Then we figure out what to do. It was a desperate, ill-conceived plan, born of panic, but it was the only option that presented itself. Martha nodded, already moving. Okay. I'll make sure no one's looking. You get out the back door. Be quick, Sarah. And whatever you do, don't let anyone see her. The next few minutes were a blur of frantic, hushed activity. Sarah, cradling the baby, moved with a newfound agility, her heart pounding against her ribs. She slipped out the back door of the diner, the cold pre-dawn air biting at her exposed skin. The darkness was a welcome cloak, obscuring her hurried movements as she fumbled with her car keys. The old Honda Civic, usually just a means of transport, now felt like a temporary refuge, a steel shell against the unknown. She gently placed the baby, still miraculously quiet, in the back seat, covering her with her own worn jacket. The baby's eyes, wide and curious, seemed to observe Sarah with an unnerving intensity, as if understanding the gravity of the situation. Sarah climbed into the driver's seat, her hands gripping the steering wheel, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She couldn't just drive away. She had to go back inside, finish her shift, pretend everything was normal. The thought was nauseating. Returning to the diner, she found Martha wiping down the counter, her face a mask of practiced indifference. Mr. Jenkins sat hunched over his coffee, oblivious. Sarah resumed her duties, her movements stiff, her mind racing. Every clatter of a plate, every customer entering the diner, sent a jolt of fear through her. The scent of stale coffee and frying grease, once comforting, now felt suffocating. Hours dragged by. The sun began to creep above the horizon, painting the sky in pale shades of gray and pink. The diner slowly filled with the morning rush, construction workers, early commuters, retirees. Each face seemed to scrutinize her, each glance a potential threat. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the secret of the baby was emblazoned on her forehead. Around 5:30 a.m., Martha approached her, her voice low. I found something. On the baby's neck. A small chain. It was tucked under her chin. Sarah's blood ran cold. She hadn't noticed anything. Martha led her back to the office, pulling out a small, tarnished silver locket from her apron pocket. It was simple, unadorned, but clearly old. I didn't want to open it in case someone saw, Martha explained, her eyes wide. But it's definitely not a cheap trinket. Looks like it might be important. With trembling fingers, Sarah took the locket. It was cold against her skin. She pried it open, revealing 2 miniature photographs. On one side, a woman with kind eyes and dark hair, smiling faintly. On the other, a man, his face partially obscured, but with a definite resemblance to the Hell's Angel who had handed her the baby. His eyes, even in the faded photograph, held a familiar intensity. Her parents, Sarah breathed, a new wave of understanding washing over her. The man wasn't just a random Hell's Angel, he was likely the baby's father, or at least intimately connected to her. The desperation in his eyes, the urgency of his command, suddenly made chilling sense. He hadn't just abandoned her, he had entrusted her, in a moment of extreme peril, to the only person available. This changes things, Martha said, her voice grim. If this is his family, then whoever he's running from, they might be looking for them. For her. This locket, it could be a target. The revelation of the locket, instead of providing comfort, amplified the danger. It was a tangible link to the mysterious world from which the baby had come. It meant the baby was not just an anonymous bundle, but a child with a past, a family, and likely, a very dangerous present. Sarah closed the locket, clutching it tightly in her hand. The weight of it, combined with the weight of the baby waiting in her car, became almost unbearable. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of information. Why would the father, a Hell's Angel, be so desperate to hide his own child? What kind of enemy would force such a choice? The questions swirled, each more terrifying than the last. We can't stay here, Sarah declared, her voice firmer this time. Not for long. Mr. Henderson will be here. And if anyone connects the baby to that man, to the diner, she shuddered, imagining the potential consequences. Martha nodded slowly, her street smarts kicking in. You're right. We need to get her somewhere safe. Away from here. But where, Sarah? Where do you hide a baby when the whole world might be looking for her? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. The diner, once a symbol of her mundane existence, now felt like a trap. The morning light, which should have brought reassurance, instead illuminated the stark reality of their predicament. Sarah looked at the locket in her hand, then towards the back door, where her car, and the innocent life it held, awaited. Her ordinary life was irrevocably over. She was no longer just a waitress, she was now a reluctant guardian, thrust into a world of danger she barely understood, with a tiny, fragile life depending on her every move. The night was over, but the true nightmare, she realized, had only just begun. The conflicts were just starting to unfold, promising a terrifying and uncertain path ahead. The morning light, which should have brought reassurance, instead illuminated the stark reality of their predicament. Sarah looked at the locket in her hand, then towards the back door, where her car, and the innocent life it held, awaited. Her ordinary life was irrevocably over. She was no longer just a waitress, she was now a reluctant guardian, thrust into a world of danger she barely understood, with a tiny, fragile life depending on her every move. The night was over, but the true nightmare, she realized, had only just begun. The conflicts were just starting to unfold, promising a terrifying and uncertain path ahead. We can't stay here, Sarah declared, her voice firmer this time. Not for long. Mr. Henderson will be here. And if anyone connects the baby to that man, to the diner, she shuddered, imagining the potential consequences. Martha nodded slowly, her street smarts kicking in. You're right. We need to get her somewhere safe. Away from here. But where, Sarah? Where do you hide a baby when the whole world might be looking for her? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. The diner, once a symbol of her mundane existence, now felt like a trap. Martha, ever the pragmatist, was already thinking. My cousin's old hunting cabin. Upstate, 2 hours from here. It's isolated, no cell service, no nosy neighbors. No one goes there anymore. It was a desperate suggestion, but the only one that offered a glimmer of hope. Sarah's car, an old Honda Civic, was reliable enough for the journey. The plan, hastily formed, was precarious but immediate. Martha quickly finished her shift, making excuses for Sarah's sudden departure to Mr. Jenkins, who was too engrossed in his toast to notice anything amiss. Sarah slipped out the back door once more, the baby stirring quietly in the back seat. The locket, now tucked securely in her pocket, felt like a burning ember against her thigh. She drove, Martha navigating, the silence in the car broken only by the baby's soft breathing and the hum of the engine. The landscape changed from urban sprawl to winding country roads, dense with autumn foliage. 2 hours later, they arrived at a dilapidated cabin nestled deep within a thick forest. It was rustic, long and used, but offered immediate sanctuary. Inside, dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of sunlight filtering through grimy windows. Martha, with surprising efficiency, began to clear a space, making it as comfortable as possible. Sarah, meanwhile, focused on the baby. The infant, whom they had tentatively named Lily, was awake now, her innocent blue eyes observing her new surroundings with a quiet curiosity. She needed food, a change, and warmth. We need supplies, Martha stated, pulling a worn blanket from a chest. I'll drive to the nearest town. It's small, no one will recognize me. I'll get formula, diapers, some food for us. You stay here. Don't open the door for anyone. Her tone was firm, leaving no room for argument. Sarah nodded, grateful for Martha's composure. While Martha was gone, Sarah examined the locket again. The faded photographs revealed so little, yet spoke volumes. The woman's gentle smile, the man's intense gaze. He was Lily's father. His desperate plea, hide that child, echoed in her mind. There had to be more. Running her fingers over the baby's worn blanket, she felt a small, hard lump stitched into the fabric. With a pair of scissors she found in the cabin, she carefully cut open the seam, revealing a tiny, waterproof USB drive. Her heart pounded. This was it. The missing piece. Martha returned hours later, laden with bags. Her face was pale, her usual cynicism replaced by a grim determination. There was a news report on the radio, she said, her voice barely a whisper. A body found. On the outskirts of the city. A biker. Identified as Jax Miller. Hell's Angel. Suspected gang violence. Sarah froze, the USB drive clutched in her hand. Jax Miller. The man who had handed her Lily. Her blood ran cold. He hadn't just abandoned his child, he had died trying to protect her. The urgency in his eyes, the grim determination, suddenly made agonizing sense. He had known his time was short. We need to see what's on this, Sarah said, holding up the USB drive. Martha, still shaken, found an old, dusty laptop in the cabin's storage, a relic from her cousin's college days. With trembling fingers, Sarah inserted the drive. It contained a single video file. The man in the video was Jax Miller, the Hell's Angel. His face was bruised, his eyes haunted, but his voice was steady, filled with a raw, desperate love. If you're watching this, he began, his voice raspy, it means I didn't make it. My name is Jax. This is my daughter, Lily. Her mother, Maria, the woman in the locket, she was killed last week. By the club. By Sarge and his crew. He explained everything. Jax had been a loyal Hell's Angel for years, but he'd met Maria, a nurse, and fallen in love. He wanted out. He had discovered that Sarge, the chapter president, was running a massive human trafficking operation, using the club's network and legitimate businesses as a front. Jax had gathered evidence, intending to expose them and escape with Maria and Lily. But Sarge found out. Maria was killed, and Jax barely escaped with Lily. He knew they would come for Lily, to silence any future claims, any potential witness. I saw you, Sarah, Jax continued, looking directly into the camera, his eyes burning with an almost spiritual plea. Working at the diner. You always treated everyone with kindness, even the rough ones like me. I knew I couldn't trust anyone from the club. The police, they're too deep, too corrupt in this city. I could only trust a stranger, someone outside the game. Please, Sarah. Hide my child. Protect her. The evidence is here, on this drive. Names, dates, locations, bank accounts. Get it to a journalist, a federal agent, anyone outside this city's reach. There's a reporter in Seattle, Rebecca Thorne, she's known for taking on organized crime. Her contact info is in the file. She's clean. She'll know what to do. Don't give up Lily. Not to anyone. They'll never stop looking for her, not as long as Sarge is alive. You're her only hope. The video ended, leaving a profound silence in the cabin. Sarah and Martha stared at the screen, the weight of the revelation crushing them. Human trafficking. The Hell's Angels. The sheer scale of the evil was incomprehensible. And Lily, this innocent child, was at the heart of it. Rebecca Thorne, Martha murmured, snapping out of her daze. Seattle. That's a long way. We have to do it, Sarah said, her voice firm, resolute. The fear hadn't vanished, but it was now overshadowed by a fierce sense of purpose. Jax had trusted her, a complete stranger, with his most precious possession. She wouldn't betray that trust. The next few days were a blur of intense planning and desperate measures. They couldn't risk using the cabin's landline, assuming it even worked. Martha's old flip phone had limited service in the area, but just enough to send a coded email to Rebecca Thorne using a public library Wi-Fi in the nearest town, a risky but necessary trip. The email, carefully crafted, hinted at explosive information regarding a major organized crime ring, promising evidence and a child in danger, asking for a secure way to communicate. Rebecca Thorne, intrigued and sensing the urgency, responded with instructions for an encrypted messaging app. Over the next week, Sarah, using Martha as her go-between for internet access, slowly transferred Jax's evidence. Rebecca Thorne, a seasoned investigative journalist, quickly realized the gravity of the situation. She arranged a meeting point, a small, anonymous motel outside Seattle, promising protection and a pathway to federal authorities. The journey was harrowing. They drove Sarah's Civic, mostly at night, avoiding major highways, staying in cheap, out-of-the-way motels. Lily, miraculously, remained a calm, quiet baby, as if sensing the gravity of their mission. Sarah discovered a maternal instinct she never knew she possessed, caring for Lily with a tenderness that surprised even Martha. But their pursuers were relentless. One evening, at a gas station in rural Idaho, Sarah saw them. Two burly men on Harley-Davidsons, their leather vests emblazoned with the Hells Angels patch. They scanned the cars, their eyes cold and calculating. Sarah, holding Lily close, ducked behind a semi-truck, her heart pounding. Martha, quick-thinking, created a diversion by spilling a tray of oil filters, drawing the men's attention while Sarah slipped away. It was a close call, a stark reminder of the constant danger. They made it to the motel in Seattle. Rebecca Thorne was waiting. She was exactly as Jax had described, sharp, professional, with an unwavering gaze. She listened intently as Sarah recounted the story, her eyes occasionally flickering to the sleeping Lily. She examined the locket, the USB drive, and the evidence Sarah had already transmitted. "This is huge, Sarah," Rebecca said, her voice low and serious. "Bigger than I thought. This could bring down a significant portion of their operation, maybe even expose corruption higher up." She assured them that federal agents, already working on a larger investigation into organized crime, would be involved immediately. Lily was now under federal protection, as were Sarah and Martha. The resolution was not a sudden explosion of justice but a methodical unraveling. Federal agents moved swiftly, using Jax's meticulously gathered evidence to raid Hells Angels compounds across multiple states. Sarge and his inner circle were arrested, their human trafficking network dismantled. The news reports were sensational, painting a grim picture of the club's true activities, far beyond drugs and turf wars. Sarah and Martha were debriefed extensively. They were offered witness protection, a new life, new identities. Martha, ever practical, chose a quiet life in a small town, far from the shadows of the past, but promised to always be there for Sarah. For Sarah, the choice was clear. She couldn't abandon Lily. The baby, now almost 6 months old, had become her world. The fierce protectiveness had blossomed into unconditional love. Lily was safe, but she was still an orphan, a child who had known nothing but danger from birth. Sarah, the waitress who had never held a baby, decided to become Lily's mother. She declined witness protection for herself, choosing instead to forge a new life, openly, but in a new city, far from the reach of the Hells Angels' residual influence. With the help of Rebecca Thorne and the federal agents, she received support to start fresh. She found a small apartment, a job in a quiet cafe, and enrolled in night classes. She wasn't just Sarah the waitress anymore, she was Sarah, Lily's mother, a woman who had faced unimaginable danger and emerged with a strength she never knew she possessed. The mystery of the baby's origins was finally resolved. Jax Miller, the Hells Angel, had paid the ultimate price to save his daughter, entrusting her to a stranger's kindness. Sarah, an ordinary woman, had answered that desperate plea, stepping into a world of peril and emerging as a hero. The chilling words, "Hide that child," had not been a curse, but a sacred trust, a desperate father's last act of love. Lily, with her father's intense eyes and her mother's gentle smile, grew, unaware of the storm she had weathered, safe in the arms of the woman who had chosen to be her guardian, her protector, her mother. Sarah's life, once a predictable cycle of serving lukewarm coffee, was now an unfolding testament to courage, love, and the extraordinary power of an ordinary human heart. The nightmare was over, and a new, hopeful chapter had begun.